Hey everybody, it is Friday night. This is Adam from Tungsten Amplification, and we are back on the Dynaco ST-35 project. It's been kind of a wild 48 hours here. When I first put the tubes in the amplifier and fired it up, it started squealing like a car alarm about once every second maybe, making it sounded like a sweep generator going upwards. And I tried a lot of different things. When I pulled the driver tube, that caused it to stop. And that was good because it meant that it was not in the output section, it was in the phase inverter section. After a day of scratching my head and trying all sorts of different variations of having different portions of the negative feedback loop connected, I went online and found some really useful posts on audiokarma.com by Dave Gillespie that described the Dynaco negative feedback circuit and the layout of their PCB board amps and how many of the DIY PTP style amps have oscillation problems, and the minimal parts count in the Dynaco amplifiers and how they left out some components that might have been helpful for stability's sake, and probably made some other design considerations because certain parts were cheaper than other parts in the 60s. Capacitors, electrolytics. So after all of that, I came back out here, played around with some of the suggestions that were made in those threads, still didn't get the results I was looking for, and I eventually disconnected the entire negative feedback circuit. So let's take a look at the schematic real quick. Everything that's highlighted here has been removed from the circuit. Additionally, because this was no longer the phase inverter, because the negative feedback loop was no longer connected to the second triode, it was suggested to change this resistor to a 33K from a 27K so that it matched the other side and you got symmetry between the two waveforms. And that made sense to me, so I went ahead and did that. It improved the treble response when I did that. The other thing I changed when I wired this up initially, I had connected pin 3 to the EL84 that was not part of the feedback network. And while that was not the cause of the oscillation that I was getting, it was certainly not connected properly. So I changed that before I removed the negative feedback loop, as I've tried one step at a time to isolate exactly what the problem was. According to everything I read, a portion of the negative feedback loop, maybe this area here, is also contains some positive feedback. Basically, as soon as I took this part out, it stopped oscillating. And now I'm trying to figure out a subtle way to run just a standard negative feedback loop and, just chill things out a little bit. It sounds really good right now, but I wouldn't mind decreasing the gain just a hair. So as you can see, let me make sure that's zoomed in properly. There's quite a bit more space in here now. This large 0.22 capacitor had been setting across both of these sockets here. And these capacitors were crossed very tightly across each other. These capacitors were actually in a Y format, but they were wired in reverse, so I ended up having to change the orientation of both of those pairs. Right now I have my 12AU7 preamp disconnected from the circuit. I've got alligator clips and I've been playing with having the preamp in and having the preamp out. I think what I'm going to do is rewire the cathodes in the preamp without bypass capacitors, so it's just a single resistor from each side to ground, and we'll get some degenerative feedback. That'll actually lower the gain at that stage. I may also change the plate resistor values. I've had them at 100K right now, which is the spec from the Universal 4S preamp project, and is what you would normally see on a 12AX7. But since I'm going to be using a 12AU7 only, I think I can come way down on those and reduce the gain at that point as well. I haven't decided if I'm going to up the value of the coupling capacitors. Right now, like I said, they're a 0.22. I've used a 0.22, and I've used a 0.47 in the past with really good results. The bass is decent on these. This circuit is not a real bass heavy hi-fi. It's really focused on the mid-range and the human voice. So I'm going to play around with that, but not try to make it something that it's not. Other than that, we're really on track. I just have to get a new dual gang pot. I put a 250K audio taper in there, and I think I'm going to go with something much smaller, like a 10K linear taper, and see what that gets me. I think I've got some 50Ks on order as well. I'm still going to try to play around and get some negative feedback in there, but for right now I have no negative feedback. I've got the stock Dynaco circuit minus the feedback loop, the negative feedback loop. Everything else is as intended. So that's my starting point, and I'm going to continue to tweak it. Hope you enjoy this video. Have a safe weekend.